يا عليم علمنا من علمك ما ترضى به عنا ولا تؤاخذنا بما تعلمه منا يا حليم خلقنا بخلق الحلم وحققنا بحقائق العلم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Tonight, inshallah, we continue speaking about the marvels of silence and the secrets of the tongue from Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya. We want to talk tonight about an extremely important topic that I think all of us, especially myself, need to be reminded of over and over again. And this is not to tell people's secrets. And also, of course, not to make false promises. That's a little bit more straightforward. And then Imam al-Ghazali talks about lying in speech and under oath. The faculty of speech is among the most distinctively human of all the gifts that God gave us. We are the speaking animal. We are that animal who has the gift of articulate speech, al-bayan. And this distinguishes us from all other animals. The gift of articulate speech makes us potentially like the angels. They also have this gift. And it sets us apart from other animals. As we said, many animals, we know they can communicate. Ants communicate, bees communicate, dogs communicate. Animals can communicate, but they don't have articulate speech. They don't have the gift that we have. One of the things that we must say, though, is that animals don't lie. Animals that communicate, and if you know how to read the indications and signs that animals give, even if it's a snake, you know exactly what that snake is going to do. You know exactly what it intends. We ought to be truthful in our speech. Our speech also should be an accurate representation of what we know to be true, what we believe to be true. It should be an act of counsel and advice and teaching and goodness. When we lie in our speech and when we harm others by our speech, then this gift that was meant to make us distinctive in the animal kingdom and to raise us up to the level of the angels, it actually makes us lower than the low. And it makes us much lower than the animals. They, again, are truthful in any communication they give. When the dog wags its tail, it's truly happy. It doesn't do that out of hypocrisy or lying. Speech is a powerful instrument. It is the key that unlocks knowledge, and that indicates knowledge, and that enables us to teach, and to learn, and to perfect knowledge. And as we saw last night, it also has the power to curse and to harm. And we don't do that. As a rule, we strictly avoid using our tongues to curse. And many people, when they curse, they seem to be disconnected from understanding that this curse is a negative prayer. It's a negative dua. And it will hurt you. It will hurt others. We read the hadith of the Prophet last time, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was with his companions and there were women with them, and one of the women began to curse her camel. And then the Prophet said, then get off of the camel. take everything off of the camel and let the camel go, because you cursed it. It's a cursed camel. Why would you ride now on a cursed camel? And probably she cursed the camel just because it was habit. And this is what we often do. But the Prophet reminded her and us through her that this is a very serious thing. We mentioned the other hadith of a Sahabi that was riding with the Prophet ﷺ and cursed his camel. And the Prophet said, don't travel with us on the back of a cursed camel. So he too had to give up his camel. So language is powerful. Language can hurt. Language can bring harm. And also language can do wonderful things. It can repair. It can bring good. It can be a key to good. And it can be a lock to lock down falsehood. There is no false or empty speech in the garden. In the garden there is no laghu. There is no laghia. There is no ta'thim. The speech of the garden is all perfect speech. Perfect speech that you yourself will be the master of, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala. And as we know from the Quran, this is one of the greatest blessings of the garden. That you and I, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala, will be able to sit there and to speak eloquent, beautiful, eternal words of truth, and to discover all the truth about God and His plan in creation, and why history was the way it was, why the good things happened and the bad things happened. You'll understand that perfectly, and you'll want to understand it more. And then also you will use your tongue to unleash and to receive the mysteries of the knowledge of God, which is the greatest of all knowledge, and which is the greatest of all the fruits of the garden. On the day of judgment and in the fire, no one lies. Not even the disbeliever and not even the great liar. They can't lie anymore. That's finished. And now they tell the truth. And now they come to know the truth. And that truth, in fact, is so heavy that they must be veiled. They cannot be unveiled, because it wouldn't be bearable. We ask Allah to not let us be like that, to be people who are unveiled in this world and the next, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala. Umar said, as you remember from last night, Inna shaqashiq al-kalam min shaqashiq al-shaytan. He said, rambling speech is from the ramblings of Satan. And Imam Ali said, Inna kathiran min al-khutabi min shaqashiq al-shaytan. That many speeches are nothing but the ramblings on of Satan. Again, as we noted, this is not because what the person is saying in his or her ramblings is necessarily false, but it's because they don't care. They are not using speech as an instrument of truth. They're using speech for some other reason, to draw attention to themselves, to their eloquence, to promote themselves. Maybe they're also using it for particular agendas or whatever it may be, but they're not using speech properly. And that's why it's called the ramblings on of Satan. We have to be careful about our speech. I have to be careful about my speech. All of us have to do that. This is one of the greatest trusts that we must strive always to fulfill. And when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we see that we make lots of mistakes. Whether we're talking about superfluous speech, excessive speech, false speech, speech about what does not concern us, all of us make many mistakes. And when we pay attention to that, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, hopefully we can begin to be more careful, more accurate, wiser in the things that we say, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Imam al-Shafi'i said, نزهوا أسماعكم عن استماع الخنا كما تنزهون ألسنتكم عن النطق به فإن المستمع شريك القائل. We said this, we mentioned this yesterday. It's so beautiful, I want to repeat it. So Imam al-Shafi'i said, keep your ears unpolluted. Purify your ears. Keep your ears unpolluted from listening to profanities, al-khana, just as you keep your tongues unpolluted from speaking them. For the listener is a partner to the speaker. And we could add that this also pertains to the reader, and this also pertains to the watcher and the observer. We want to be careful what we watch. We want to be careful what we let go, come into our vision. Your eyes are a direct window to your heart. Your ears are a window to your heart. And your heart is precious, and you care about your heart. So we have to be careful what we do. We may see something that we can never forget for the rest of our lives. It may be something beautiful that we're thankful for, but it also could be something very ugly that we can't get rid of. We can't exercise it. Now, all of this also pertains to listening to people and to listening to people's secrets and to finding out things about them. When you come to a person's house, and we thank our generous brother for opening his house, but you see so many things about his family that you never knew before. These are wonderful things, they're good things, but also they are trusts. So it is not proper for us just to begin to proclaim all the things we saw and all the things we heard. That's not good character, and that's not Islam. And we have to be really careful about that today, because we live in the age of social media. We live in the age of the YouTube and of all these other aspects of social media. And we have also these incredibly amazing telephones, and iPads, so that, you can take a video. You can't just take a picture, you can take a video. And frankly, I don't mind. But the thing is that the proper thing is always to ask. Many people will come up and just take a picture. And then they will take a video. A speech will be given, and they'll just take a video of it. And this has become a habit for us. So it's not like a sinful thing. But again, we want to know how that fits into Islam. And many times people post things on YouTube without even asking. And that can be very harmful, especially because often things on YouTube are passed around, and they're often taken out of context. So they can be extremely destructive and extremely harmful. So we have to be aware of these things, the things we post, the pictures we take. We also live in an age in which one of the standards, the so-called standards of biography, for example, is to reveal and to uncover everything. So is that really what we want to do? And often you will find a biographer who is writing about a great person, and his or her endeavor is to try to find something shocking about that person, and something maybe very demeaning about that person. And we could give examples, but I don't want to give those examples. We have great people, like Malcolm X, for example. He was a great man. And there are people always trying to dig up things about him. So what's this all about? And maybe the things you say are true. Some of them are definitely false. But it's like, again, do we have no heroes anymore? Do we have no one to look up to? Is everyone going to be reduced to the lowest level? And this is a big problem, I believe. Again, we are people who believe in transcendental humanism. We're humanists. Our tradition is humanistic. And as we said before, Western humanism owes very much to us. George Makdisi's book, The Rise of Humanism, is an excellent study of that. But we have humanistic traditions, not just one. He focuses on the Chancellery and the Udaba and its influence on the Italian Renaissance and other things. But we have transcendental humanism, meaning that you have incredible potential. You are the son of Adam, the daughter of Eve. You can go higher and higher and higher. That's transcendence. And in order to do that, you have got to master yourself. You have got to purify yourself. You've got to fill your heart with light and knowledge. There's no limit to how far we go. Just as, unfortunately, there's no limit to how low we can go. But secular humanism, which is the standard form of humanism, I would say, in much of the Western world today, it's one of the great dangers of that secular humanism is that it wants to reduce everything to the lowest common denominator. And therefore, a historian may even think that he or she has done something great if they take a great person like John Milton, and they reduce him to just an ordinary human being. Okay, so then what do we have left after that? And whom do we admire? And then you know yourself that your life isn't maybe a checkered career like my own. We have ups and we have downs. And what about the person who maybe did things that weren't right, but then who changed completely and became an excellent human being? They have no rights anymore? That they belong to a public sector in which you can say about them anything, and in fact in which you are obliged to do that? So we have to have our own standards. We have to have our own standards in the way we speak and also in the scholarship we do. So tonight we want to talk about this: other people's secrets, other people's families, other people's realities. And, they have a right to privacy. One of the most conspicuous elements of Islamic culture and civilization, and you know this very well, is the fact that historically, Islamic culture and civilization, even though it took on thousands of different beautiful forms, it always stresses very carefully the distinction between the private and the public. And the private is usually very guarded. It is intimate. And you can be allowed into someone's private house, as you are now, and as you are in any Muslim country. But that's an amana, and it's a great thing, and you're not there to take pictures of everything and to spread them around. And then in the public arena, we have also a different way that we work and that we transact. And this is a very beautiful tradition. But the private, especially your words you say, your thoughts you think, the way you live, your family, the good things in your family, the problems in your family, and so forth, these are not to be spread at will. And we have lots of things that we have to be mindful of in that regard. For example, we have people, personalities. Let's say a person like Yusuf Islam. He's a great human being, incredible human being. Okay? If we were to meet him or to go to his house, we want to tell people that. If we go to Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's house, we want to tell people that. We're happy. We want to share this news. And it may be that everything you heard and everything you saw is something that they would say you're welcome to tell other people that. But the thing is, you have to be careful, because we do not have a license that just because we hear someone speak in private or go to their house that we can tell the whole world. Okay? We don't have that license at all. And so this is something that's very important for us to talk about, because a lot of us today have forgotten that. One of the great salihin, righteous men of the past, was told a secret about another person by his friend. And his friend then asked him, "Have you now got that down in your memory?" Imam al-Ghazali tells this story. In other words, I guess you won't forget this now. And his friend replied, "No, I have already forgotten it." Okay? And it might not have been that bad, but like, this is not my business, and it's also not your business. So although you told me this thing, I didn't remember it. I forgot it immediately. There are certain types of speech we don't want to listen to. There are certain things we don't want to watch. But also there are certain types of speech that if we hear them, we want them to go in one ear and out the other. Don't register that. Don't remember that. Let it go. So, ifsha'u sir, the spreading of secrets, this is generally a very, very bad thing to do. A very bad thing to do. In some cases, it's forbidden, especially if the secret that we spread harms other people. Then it's forbidden. And sometimes it may not harm them, but they wouldn't want you to have told that. They would have preferred that that remain a secret. And so there, it is regarded to be base character. Maybe it's not forbidden, but you are a noble person. You're not a base person. And sometimes we do the things base people do. Al-la'im. Not because we're base, but because we have not been taught, or we have forgotten the standards that we want to live by, and these things become so common that we forget about them. The ability to keep secrets and the ability to protect the confidentiality of others is one of the greatest things that you and I can ever accomplish. And in fact, in the spiritual path to God's knowledge, Azza wa Jal, which is the highest knowledge of all, you can't go very far if you can't keep confidentiality. And of course, in all of this, like so many other things, we've got to be able to distinguish between what can be told and what cannot be told, what ought to be told and what should not. And sometimes we make mistakes in that. As long as they're honest mistakes, then inshallah we're still learning. But we want them always to be nothing more than honest mistakes. Qulubul ahrar, quburul asrar. The hearts of the free are the graves of the secrets. And the hur in Islam, or the hurra, the free woman, this is the most noble of all people. This is what the way we use that word. The hurra is the woman of principle, the woman of integrity, the woman of generosity, the woman of the best character. And the same is true of the man, the hurra. That's when we call them free. But they are bound by principle. They are bound by standards. They don't just do anything they want to do or say anything they want to say. Na'udhu billahi min lisan as-su' wa min 'ayn as-su'. We ask God to protect us from the evil tongue and the evil eye. And we don't want our tongues, although your tongue is a good tongue, but we don't want our tongues to fulfill the function of an evil tongue, that spreads secrets and things about others that harm them. Telling people secrets is not generally permissible. And the reason for that is that it usually involves elements of ida, of bringing harm, and then also of tahawun, which is taking people lightly. This is part of the integrity of that person who has spoken to you and told you about his or her life, and maybe brought you into their family, that you hold them in high esteem, and that you not take them harm. It is forbidden. It is haram. I said that a minute ago. But he adds something I forgot to say, and khiyana. It is betrayal. It is treachery. And you're not treacherous. You're not the kind of person to do that. But again, we may do it without intending to do it. Abu Dawood transmits a hadith which is Hasan. It's a good transmission, not the strongest, but it's good, it is strong. He said, إِذَا حَدَّثَ الرَّجُلُ الْحَدِيثِ ثُمَّ الْتَفَتْ فَهِيَ أَمَانَةٌ. He said, if a person says something and then turns around to see if anyone is looking, then it is a trust that must be kept. You cannot speak that word, even if he or she didn't say anything. Maybe you're talking in the mosque and people walk in and they just look to see, are they hearing what we're saying? Are they overhearing? So you don't have to be told anything more than that. That is an amana. And that amana cannot be betrayed. Of course, the lawyer, the physician, the psychologist, the advisor, the counselor, many other professions. As you know, if we cannot honor and keep confidentiality, we have no career at all. That's one of the main things that we have to be able to do as lawyers or physicians or psychologists or counselors or whatever may be to guard the secrets of the people who come to us. But you want to be like that as a matter of your own livelihood, because this is also part of the career of the believer. We demonstrate our honor in ourselves and our honor to others by the dignity that we have in holding and keeping secrets, in protecting confidentiality. Imam al-Ghazali says, so be silent about the secrets of your friend. Anything that he or she has divulged to you, never spread them to others, not even to their closest friends. And again, that's something I think we have to be told, and it has to be emphasized, because usually we would assume that the closest people are the ones that it's okay to tell that. But you don't have that license. And if you will not do that, your dignity will be known to all the world. And he says also, do not reveal anything of their other secrets, like what's going on in their family, what their house is like. Maybe even, they have had great financial successes. Maybe also they have great financial problems. So unfortunately, it is not my prerogative that I can talk about that with others, unless it's authorized. Imam al-Ghazali says, this of course pertains to your friend. It also pertains to your enemy. It also pertains to the friend that is no longer your friend. The friend who doesn't talk to you anymore. So you know many things about that friend. And now you're not friends anymore, you don't even talk. But again, part of your dignity as a human being is that you will not tell his or her secrets. Imam al-Ghazali says that to do that, to spread the secrets of friends who are no longer friends, maybe they're even enemies, May Allah protect us. These are high standards. May Allah enable us to live by these standards. He said it is an example of lu'mu tabi'i wa khubthul batin. It is an example of baseness of nature and of wickedness or impurity of the inner self. So these are things that we don't want to be our characteristics. And again, I want to say, because we do these things unwittingly. So it doesn't mean that you are khabith al-taba. And it doesn't mean, that you are la'im al-batin. But what it means is that you are following the examples and leads here of people that you don't want to follow anymore. You want to stop this. You don't want to have this habit. So he says that in general, be quiet about anything that the other person would dislike in general and in detail. Unless it is obligatory to say that for some overpowering reason. And we won't go into that tonight. But there may be times when, we have to disclose things as disliked as that might be. The Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-majalisu bil-amana. This is a well-known hadith. Al-majalisu bil-amana. Illa thalathata majalis. Majlisun yusfaku fihi damun haram. ومجلس يستحل فيه فرج حرام ومجلس يستحل فيه مال من غير حله. So he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, majalis, when we sit and speak together, you all know what a majlis is. When we sit and talk together, that is a trust. That is a trust. It cannot be divulged. We also have departmental meetings. You also have board meetings. You also have other kinds of meetings, in your professional careers or in your societies you may belong to or whatever. And these majalis are amana. And we have to honor them. We had a scandal in Chicago, very big scandal. And one of the best organizations in Chicago met with their board to talk about the scandal. And their board was fairly large. But immediately the word that they were discussing the scandal got out. So what happened? I know those people, and I don't believe any of them is bad. But again, they didn't understand that you have no right to talk about this. And the scandal was such that they could hardly keep from talking about it. It was outrageous. So they said, do you know that this happened? Okay, but the thing is that as long as that was discussed in the board, you can't talk about it. And in fact, because it was disclosed, then it made it more difficult for the lawyer who was brought in the scandal to actually do his work. Because for him to do his work, he needed to get there before anyone began to talk about it. So, al-majalis bil-amana, except, the Prophet says, 3 kinds of majalis. A majlis, a session or conversation, a meeting in which forbidden blood will be spilt. That either a person is going to be killed or they're planning to kill the person or something like that. So here, I'm sorry, this amana is not an amana to be kept. Or the Prophet said, a majlis in which a forbidden sexual relationship will be facilitated. And he said, which might be, the first thing that would come to mind would be an invalid marriage in traditional Islamic law. And a majlis in which property will be taken which is not permissible to take. And these are 3 examples. So the fuqaha, when they talk about that, they would say that it's not just these 3 specific types, but other types of situations that involve major rights that have to be defended and protected. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and this is a sahih hadith, إِنَّمَا يَتَجَالَسُ الْمُتَجَالِسَانِ بِالْأَمَانَةِ. You don't have to say that. The person doesn't have to tell you, I want you not to say anything I say. No. The Prophet said, إِنَّمَا يَتَجَالَسُ الْمُتَجَالِسَانِ بِالْأَمَانَةِ وَلَا يَحِلُّ لِأَحَدِهِمَا أَنْ يُفْشِيَ عَلَى صَاحِبِهِ مَا يَكْرَهُ. So the Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Islam is that it is an amana, whether they say that or not. It is not permissible for either of them to spread about his or her companion what he disliked. And again, we want to add to that, it might be something that he or she doesn't mind, but will it hurt them? Will it harm them? Will it create division? So here you have to be smart. Maybe someone tells you something and you say, could I put that, could I put that in an email? Could I spread it among people? And they say no harm. But then you think about it, maybe he doesn't understand that if that goes public, it may cause harm that he or she's not aware of. So you have to also exercise this amana. A great scholar may give a speech, and he may say something potentially controversial in that speech. And sometimes you have people immediately taking those controversial statements to other people. And like, is that really the right thing to do? And that is a type of spying. That is a type of improper reporting. And sometimes it leads to big problems, especially if the person says something that was for you. It wasn't for the whole world. This is the problem we have, isn't it? That today we're almost always speaking to the whole world. Anything we say can go on YouTube or other forms of media. You write an email to someone years ago, and then all of a sudden it's out there among everybody. And maybe that's okay, but the email was written to that particular person. It wasn't written to the whole world. So these are things we have to be very sensitive of. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Man satara musliman, satarahu Allahu fi dunya wal akhirah. In another, and this is in Muslim, in the transmission of Bukhari and Muslim, they say, satarahu Allahu yawm al-qiyamah. So whoever protects the honor of a Muslim, whoever whoever conceals their faults, conceals their defects, or things they may say that are not faults, but you don't want that to get out. That's also satru. God will protect his honor or her honor. God will cover his faults or her faults in this world and the hereafter, and in the other transmission on the day of resurrection. We live in very difficult times. We ask Allah to make the faraj near, for all people, and especially for the Syrians and the Iraqis and the Libyans and others, and for your wonderful people as well, for all people. We know situations, I know a personal situation in Syria of one of our dear brothers, that one of his cousins, who was a very beautiful, innocent young man, he was picked up by the secret police. And his mother, God bless her, she told him, if they ask you about your friends, you don't say a word. Okay? And this is an amana. And he was taken and he was tortured to death. But alhamdulillah, he never said a word. That's what people heard. And he was tortured to tell everything he knew about friends who weren't doing anything. So what honor, what supreme honor could be greater than that for this martyr? He was just a boy, but he followed what his mother said. I won't reveal anything. Under torture. We're not under torture. And so we also have to be very careful about the things that we say. من رأى عورة فستره كان كمن أحيا موؤودة من قبرها. And it should be من رأى عورة فسترها كان كمن أحيا موؤودة من قبرها. This is in Al-Hakim. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, whoever sees a blatant fault, an awra, a blatant fault in someone, but conceals it, it shall be as if he or she brought to life an infant girl who was buried alive in Jahiliyyah. That's a great thing. But again, then how important is this? You know, often we hear bad things about people and we just think that it's mubah. We can tell the whole world about this. No, that's not what you can do, and that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is to bring the infant girl back to life. You know, cover this fault. Don't speak about this fault. Keeping secrets of others is the mark of supreme integrity. Ibn Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, recognized that Umar ibn al-Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him, had taken a great liking to his son, Abd-Allah ibn al-Abbas. Abdullah ibn Abbas, as you probably know, was very young. He was very young. But even though he was very young, Umar saw that this boy is extremely gifted and extremely intelligent. So Al-Abbas, his father, saw that Umar keeps bringing Abdullah ibn Abbas closer and closer to him and relying on him, even asking his counsel. So Al-Abbas told Abdullah the following. He said, I'm going to tell you 5 things. فَاحْفَظْ عَنِّي خَمْسًا. He said, فَاحْفَظْ عَنِّي خَمْسًا. لا تفشين له سرا ولا تغتبن عنده أحدا ولا تجرين عليه كذبا. Listen how beautiful this speech is. These people didn't speak much, but when they spoke, their speech was golden. ولا تعصين له أمرا وَلَا يَطَّلِعَنَّ مِنْكَ عَلَى خِيَانَةٍ. So Umar told Abdullah ibn Abbas, I'm going to tell you 5 things. Also, look how brilliant they are. So Ibn al-Abbas had obviously thought about this a lot. He's not just speaking like many of us, right, from the top of our heads. He had sat down and thought about this, and he said, there are 5 things, not 3, not 4, not 6. I'm going to tell you 5 things. You've got 5 fingers. You remember these 5 things. Memorize them. You can be sure that he did it immediately. He said, I will tell you 5 things. Commit them to memory from me, on my behalf. Do not tell any secret of his. And of course, the Arabic is more emphatic than that, because the Arabic is la tafshiyan. So it's like never, never tell any of his secrets, because he's bringing you very close to him. He's the Khalifa. You will learn secrets of his own and of others. Never disclose a single secret of his. Number 2, never speak ill, never backbite anyone in his presence. And of course, we'll talk about backbiting in the future. Backbiting is always the truth. Otherwise, it's not backbiting. If it's not the truth, it's called slander, namima. But backbiting is when we say something about a person which is true, but they wouldn't like you to tell that. So he says, don't backbite anybody. That, I want to tell you something true about this person. That person doesn't want you to say that. So if you won't do this, then of course this affirms your status and your dignity and your trustworthiness among Umar. He wouldn't like that. He wouldn't like that. Number 3, do not relate anything in his presence that is a lie, that is clearly not true. Don't let lies run over your tongue. La tujriyanna, as he said. La tujriyanna alayhi kathiban. Don't say anything to him that would be a lie. Another, a lie that you heard from someone else. Not a lie that you're saying, but you heard this, and this is a very important thing. Inshallah, we may talk about this at another time, but the things we hear from other people that they believe to be true, we are not immediately authorized to say those things until we know they are true. If that person is lying, you can't spread their lie, even though they think it's the truth. And many times we hear things that we believe are true because so-and-so told me, but if you just sit back and think about it, maybe it doesn't make sense. So you need to check that out, and you need to find that out before you repeat it. And then he said after that, do not disobey any command of his. When he tells you to do something, do it. And do not let him ever see in you any type of treachery. Beautiful. Ash-Sha'bi, who was one of the great successors, he spoke about this particular report of al-Abbas, and he said, كل كلمة من هذه الخمس خير من ألف. He said that each of these 5 words, each of these 5 statements that Umar made is worth more than 1,000 other statements about other things. Imam al-Ghazali says, whoever reveals secrets when he or she is angry, Allah forgive us, is la'im, is base, and we don't want to be that way. And when we're angry, this is when it's so hard to keep the secrets, but this is when it is so imperative to keep the secrets. We're angry and we want to hurt. We're angry and we want to disclose. But this is the time when you must be really careful. This is the characteristic of the la'im. They are the ones who reveal secrets when they're angry. Before that they were keeping the secret, but now they become angry and they just tell everybody. Al-Ghazali says also, he relates this, إِنَّ قَلْبَ الْأَحْمَقِ فِي وَلِسَانَ الْعَاقِلِ فِي قَلْبِهِ. So he says that the heart of the idiot is in his tongue, and the heart of the person of intellect, the tongue of the person of intellect is in his heart. So we say, and whatever, and the tongue of the believer should be behind his intellect, or in the transmission, his heart. So we want to think before we speak. We want to run things through our heart before we speak. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. The ahmaq, the fool, the idiot, his heart is in his tongue. And it doesn't mean just that he says bad things, but it means that he will expose everything. The fool cannot keep a secret. And the fool, if you just let him talk a little bit more, act a little more, he will reveal everything. So you and I don't want to be like that. Although I hate to say how many times we may have been that way. Al-Ghazali says that the ahmaq, the idiot, the fool, is not able to conceal anything that's in him. Anything that he or she feels powerfully about, they're going to expose it. They can't keep it inside. They don't have that capacity, but you do. And you have to do that. He or she always reveals it. Just give them enough time. Even in ways that he or she doesn't perceive. They don't even know that they're revealing it, but they are. Thus, Imam al-Ghazali says, be careful about keeping the company of fools, of idiots, and beware of behaving like they do. We could also add here that although it's so important to be warm, it's so important to be kind, it's so important to smile. Smiling is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And a beautiful word is sadaqah. But at the same time, just as we conceal secrets in our tongues, it is good also to develop personalities that are stable and as relatively neutral as they can be. Which means that when we have powerful emotions, it's really excellent if we can conceal them. We may see a person that we strongly dislike. So do I have the strength to conceal that dislike? That would be the best thing. Even politically, that would be the best thing. Even socially, that would be the best thing. But also, in terms of the fact that we don't want to be people who cause trouble. So the best thing is don't show that person so clearly that you don't like them. And often we may behave in such a way that we don't dislike them, but they will think we do. So we have to be very careful also about the emotions we show. And sometimes we become extremely happy. What a wonderful thing. But like even when you're extremely happy, it's a sign of strength. If you can keep that happiness inside, you don't get rid of it. You know, you're still happy, but don't let it bubble over too much. Try to keep it, and then it will radiate from you. But in a really good way, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. It's part of being balanced and trying to seek to balance our character. So this is what Imam al-Ghazali says about spreading secrets of people. And this is so important. May Allah enable us to learn it, and may He enable us to follow it. The next thing Imam al-Ghazali talks about is false promises. Imam al-Ghazali says, may Allah bless him. Thank you. He says, your tongue is quick to make promises, but your nafs may not be so quick to keep them. So this is a beautiful piece of advice. Someone says, can you do this? Yes. Can you do that? Yes. Come and visit us. I will. That's the tongue. It's easy for the tongue. And it's also something we would love to do. But your nafs, that might not be so easy. Your nafs might not permit you. That like, you made all these promises and I've got 1,000 things to do and I'm not going to be able to do that. So Imam al-Ghazali says, be careful about the promises you make. And don't make promises, the promise that we make and then we break without an excuse. This is a very dangerous thing because that happens to be a sign of hypocrisy. Doesn't mean that you're a hypocrite. But again, you have a symptom. And that symptom, you may have the symptom of a bad disease, but you don't have the disease. But this is a symptom of hypocrisy. And we don't want that disease. Thus, do not make lots of promises. And learn to keep the ones we make. May Allah facilitate that. Allah says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu awfu bil-uqud. He says, you who believe, fulfill your contractual agreements. And we could say promises, although as you know, al-uqud is stronger than that. It's basically contractual agreements. But it also includes promises. T.J. Winter, Abdul Hakim Murad, may Allah bless him. He says in his beautiful translation, fulfill your contractual agreements. He says, this is the pillar of Islamic social legal, this is the pillar of the Islamic social, legal, and political order, and is proclaimed as an absolute obligation. So the more that we keep to this, the better we will be. The more as Muslims we become people who keep our promises, who fulfill our obligations, who keep our contractual agreements, then we will be a great civilization and a great society. Unfortunately, as you know, in many Muslim societies today, that is not as common as it should be. We ask Allah to make it common, and it didn't used to be like that in the past. Michel de la Montagne, who is a very famous French figure in the early Renaissance, his memoirs are really interesting. And in his memoirs, he often talks about Muslims. I don't know if you've ever read his memoirs, they're very funny. But he often talks about Muslims in his memoirs. And it's interesting because, to my recollection, everything he says about Muslims in his memoirs is very positive. And he will talk about how the fact that a lot of his own Frenchmen are not very honest, but that Muslims are. And that they will keep their word, and that they work very hard. How would he know anything like that? Well, Muslim Spain and Portugal, and other parts of the Muslim world. So the Muslims he had contact with, and that his people knew, they weren't like a lot of Muslims today. And we don't have to be like that in the future. We need to revive these things very carefully. One of the ways when the Inquisition began to do its nasty work in Spain and Portugal, one of the ways they knew that a person was a Muslim, or had been a Muslim, was because they were extremely industrious and hard-working. Is that the characteristic of Muslims today? Some Muslims are that way. But this is the way we were known to be in Al-Andalus and in many Muslim countries. Ismail, Allah says about him, alayhi salam, إِنَّهُ كَانَ الصَّادِقَ الْوَعْدِ. And Allah doesn't say many things about Ismail in the Quran. But this is the key thing, because this is enough to indicate his infallible perfection. إِنَّهُ كَانَ الصَّادِقَ الْوَعْدِ. So this is one of the greatest traits of the prophets, and also of Ismail as one of the greatest. And this is also one of the traits that you and I want to try to imbibe. A person, it is said, promised to meet Ismail at a certain place. And this would have been how many years ago? About 4,000. That's the time that Ismail lived. It was about 4,000 years ago, generally speaking. We don't know for sure, but roughly. So this was a different time. People didn't have watches, right? And they didn't have the same schedules we have, but still they were busy. So this person promised to meet Ismail at a certain place, but then the person forgot to come. So Ismail went there and he waited for 22 days. إِنَّهُ كَانَ الصَّادِقَ الْوَعْدِ. He waited for 22 days. Before the Prophet ﷺ was given his mission in his early days, he once was promised, he once had an agreement with Abd-Allah ibn Abi al-Khansa that they would meet in a particular place. And the Prophet ﷺ promised to meet him there, and the Prophet went there, but Abdullah ibn Abi al-Khansa forgot to come. And the Prophet stayed there, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, for 3 days. And then Abdullah ibn Abi al-Khansa remembered, and he went there. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and you'll see that Abdullah was a young man. He was a young man. He said, Ya Fata, لقد شققت علي أنا ها هنا منذ ثلاث. So, how beautiful. He said, noble youth, fata. Fata is a youth, but it's a noble youth. He said, you young man, you know, but this is a beautiful word, fata. He said, you've made things hard for me. He said, I've been here waiting for you for 3 nights. In other words, maybe even 4 days, but 3 nights. Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, who is one of the great successors and he's one of the teachers of Imam Abu Hanifa, he said that if you wait for a person, they say, meet me at a certain place, he said, then go there and wait at least until the prayer time comes. You know, so this makes this easier than 2 or 3 days or 22 days. But if he said, meet me at the mosque, then you go there, and then when Salat al-Asr comes, you can pray and go. Al-Ghazali says, this is very important for us. How are we doing with time? Huh?
Maybe 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. Inshallah. Okay. I shouldn't have said that. Okay, so Imam al-Ghazali says, be careful of saying what? Inshallah. That's what he said. He said, you know, of course you want to say inshallah, or you can also say asa. Perhaps the Prophet said both. He said inshallah and he said asa. He said that's what you want to say, of course, when you talk about things you're going to do in the future. But he said, when you say it with the intention to keep your promise, not to break your promise. And so when you say, Insha'Allah, I will end in 2 minutes, right? Then you should do that, unless you have a sound excuse. And Imam al-Ghazali says, Allah cover us. Yes, sitr. He says that if you say, Insha'Allah, with the intention not to keep that promise, not to do that thing, then it is, he says, nifaq, hypocrisy. A'udhu billahi min dhalik. And again, may Allah be kind and merciful to us, because these customs spread. And when they spread, then we just all begin to do them. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, ثلاث من كن فيه فهو منافق وإن صام وصلى وزعم أنه مسلم. إذا حدث كذب وإذا وعد أخلف وإذا اؤتمن خان. And I'm sure that all of you know this hadith. There are 3 traits which whoever has them is a hypocrite. God protect us. Even if he fasts, even if he prays and claims he is a Muslim, if he speaks, he lies. If he makes a promise, he breaks it. If he is given a trust, he betrays it. So we ask Allah to make things easy for us and to enable us to get things right. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, Usika bi taqwa Allahi wa sidq al-hadith wa ada' al-amana wal wafa'u bil-ahd wa badhl al-salam wa khafd al-junah. And let's end with that. The Prophet said, he said this to Mu'adh ibn Jabal. He said, I advise you to do 3 things. Speak truthfully, sidq al-hadith, and fulfill trusts, ada'ul amana, al-wafa' bil-ahd, keeping your covenants, keeping your agreements, wa badlu salam, and to spread salam, assalamu alaikum, and to be kind and peaceful, wa khafd al-janah, and to lower your wing, which means to be generous to people, to be protective of people, to help people. So may Allah enable us to cultivate these traits and to keep them. Inshallah, tomorrow we can resume at this point. We have just a little bit more to say, and then we'll go on to the next topic, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala. So now, let's see if we can have a successful question and answer period. That's the hardest thing. That's the hardest things. The questions are easy, the answers are not easy. And there's no such thing as a stupid question, but there is such a thing as a stupid answer. So may we all be safe. Should we look at the ones from yesterday first? Why don't you think about your questions? So we had questions we didn't answer yesterday, and Sidi Hisham was so nice as to try to summarize them. So yesterday we were talking about obscenity and profanity and other things. And one of the questions was, we summarized it to say, has the attack on decency that we have seen in the world today, and especially in the West, and we were talking yesterday about how profanity and comedy and music and everything has spread in a way that would have been totally inconceivable 60 years ago or 50 years ago. And again, it happened step by step, little by little. So this person is referring to that. Well, we believe in awliya Allah. We believe in the saints of God. And every believer is one of them. And they have different degrees. And we also believe that there are awliya al-shaytan. There are the awliya of shaitan. And they also have degrees. And all the bad things that happen, they happen because Satan is behind that. Muslims today are very, very preoccupied, in many cases, with conspiracy theories. And with all due respect, conspiracy theories are often counterproductive. They often make us dysfunctional. And they often make us unable to be honest about our own faults. Because after all, there's a big conspiracy going on. And again, you're not a fool and I'm not a fool. Strategic countries like this and like many Muslim countries are never left alone. Okay, there are always people and money concerned. And you can go to poor parts of the Muslim world, like Waziristan in Pakistan, that are very poor, but it has tremendous natural resources, and it is also strategically located. And simple people in Waziristan will tell you that there are certain people there that are awash in money, and they can even tell you the countries that money comes from. And this is because those particular groups or people, they have interest there. Might be in the uranium. The shaitan is the biggest conspirator of all, and we don't want to do his work. And how do we protect our children from this? Is there an easy answer to that question? Do you have an easy answer to that question? You want to set a really good example for your children. And you want to make sure, that everything you do is decent and that everything that you do is also honest. We can't tell our children to be honest and yet lie to them. So it's very, very important to do that. Some people are blessed in their marriages, and their marriages are extremely happy. Many people are not. Many people are tried in their marriages. And many people, many of the best people, come from broken marriages. I mentioned a few days ago that my best friends when I grew up were essentially from a terribly broken marriage, because the mother and father, who came from good families, but they were both alcoholics, and they were down and out. And so they grew up in their grandmother's house. And that was a great trial for them, but they were good people. But the great blessing is when the husband and the wife, the mother and the father, love each other. My mother and my father are two streams that come together in my heart. And when the mother and father truly love each other, your children will be strong. Your children will inherit from you and from the wife. And you can look at many Muslim families. I know families in the West, Muslim families that their children maybe didn't even go to Islamic schools. They maybe went to the public schools. But the mother and father in that family love each other. They respect each other. They are like one person. And so the children end up being amazingly strong because they want to be like their mother and father. They will be like their mother and father. So we always want to focus on the relationship between us and the spouse, between the mother and the father. You cannot neglect that. You've got to cultivate that relationship. And you can't fool your children. The child knows that the father respects the mother. The child knows that the mother respects the father and loves him. And this is extremely good for them. Nothing makes a child more happy than that. And we ask Allah, when we have difficult marriages, as unfortunately so many people have, that He enable us to get those right. And counselors can help. A lot of us don't want counselors. But, the deen is counsel. And counselors are often very intelligent. They know how to go about these things. And you have to believe that you can set it right. And it's possible that you can. And you have to believe that. So these things can be set right, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We want to teach our children. We want to give our children time. You may not be able to homeschool. There are a lot of people that do homeschool, that have time for that. Homeschooling can be extremely beneficial. My great-grandmother, who was born the year that Lincoln was shot, 1865. She came west in a covered wagon. She was a beautiful woman, very intelligent. She used to teach in sod schoolhouses on the prairie. And I saw the books she would teach, because she also taught me. She would teach about Alexander the Great, Cyrus of Persia, Darius of Persia. That was part of the Kansas curriculum, believe it or not. And in rhetoric, they would tell you about the importance of rhetoric, which we don't even study today, because politicians will use it to deceive you. So that was almost like homeschooling. And again, you may not be able to do that, but pay attention to your children. Teach your children how to read. Today we're all on the internet, we're, playing these games. Reading is priceless. And you want to give them good things to read. And you can, there's so many other things to do. Doing dhikr together, worshiping together. Children need to have time, giving them time. Bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. What is the proper adab for those who are speakers or writers in the public arena to keep in mind? That's a huge question. That should be a conference. I think that all of these principles, they apply at that level just as they apply at the individual level. But here especially, we must be very concerned about things like truthfulness and harm. And we have to be careful about exaggeration. I am as guilty of that as anyone. And I often regret it. But we have to be careful about the exaggerations that we state, which we often state because we're so enthusiastic, but it can be very misleading. We have to be careful. We have to speak the truth. And then, of course, when you're going to say something that's the truth, you have to know, will it harm? Because just because something's true doesn't mean that it's not going to be harmful. And if it will harm, you don't say it. These are the rules. Things that are very true that we want to tell our mother and father or other people in the family, but they won't listen. Not to me. And maybe even if you say that, it might be harmful because they might be offended that who are you to correct me? So it's best not to talk about that. And then there may be other people that we want to tell, and it won't harm them. They won't be angry, but they won't listen. So it's not beneficial. So here, silence is golden. And, you want by your actions and by other things, to do the best that you can do to convey the message, that needs to be conveyed. But the speaker and the writer in public must be very, very careful about considerations of truth and harm, and then benefit, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And, we have to try to think about all the different kinds of people that are listening to us, and all the different ways that they understand and misunderstand. Also, when we have studied, as many of us have, and maybe we've even written, as some of us have, we become people who are very conscious of words. We're very conscious of what words mean and what they don't mean. And you'll see a really intelligent person use his or her words very carefully, and even stop at words to see what does that word actually mean. One of the things we often forget is that our audience, even if our audience is that of native speakers of English, for example, they don't necessarily understand what you're saying, as surprising as that may be. And often, they may not have been taught to listen, because one of the most important things in education, especially education of your children, is to teach your children how to listen. Memorization is a good way to do that. When we memorize things, but we know what they mean. We don't just memorize like parrots, but we memorize something and then we think about it. We know the commentary of it as we recite it. Then we also learn how to listen. And we pay attention to every word. Note-taking also is a way, it's very important to take notes so you don't forget, but note-taking also trains us in being able to listen. But many people who are in the public audience, they don't know how to listen. And they don't listen. And things that you say that you hope are very clear, they don't understand. They misunderstand. So all these things we have to be really careful about. Then we had some other questions. Should we take the new questions, or? Okay, so we'll do that, inshallah. Lots of questions. Let's see. Okay, well, let me see. I'm going to let you put these in order. I'm going to take one of them. And I'll take this question. How do I know my nafs? How do I know myself? You would like to answer that question? How do you know yourself? You look in the mirror of the self. When you get dressed in the morning and you're ready to go to work, you look in the mirror, right? And you see, did you put on the things you put on correctly? To look in the mirror of the self. And that means to begin to pay attention to ourselves, to begin to observe. Imam al-Ghazali, may Allah be pleased with him, he tells us so many things that we didn't know about the heart, the way the heart works, the way that suggestions come to the heart, the way that suggestions then become action. he tells us about the effects of speech, the power of speech, the power of silence. Silence pollinates the intellect. Silence pollinates the intellect. Okay, all of these things are extremely valuable. And one of the effects of them is so that I begin to pay attention to myself. When I don't know anything about my heart, it's just these confusions and feelings that are always happening. There's not much I can do. Once I know that my heart and your heart has a particular structure, has a particular reality, and that also certain things that occur to it are involuntary and they're not ethical or moral matters. So you don't have to be worried about that. You don't have to feel bad about that, but there are other things that are ethical. There's a point where what we do in our hearts is an ethical issue. Okay, we didn't talk about that, but we would talk about that if we talked about the marvels of the heart, which we skipped. We just talked a little bit about that. Okay, but this then enables you to begin to pay attention to yourself. And it's very important to pay attention to what you like and what you don't like. Even a cup of tea. But why do I want to drink this cup of tea? Why do I want to have sugar in this tea? Do I really need this? What if I didn't have this? This is an innocent thing. But again, it's like I want to know why I do what I do. What moves me? Once you begin to look at yourself, especially when you're able to get basic knowledge about the secrets of yourself, then you'll begin to see, and you'll be able to look in the mirror of yourself with a greater clarity than the mirror on the wall. That's very, very important. I want to give an example. I hope this is not superfluous speech. Okay? When I was a boy, I grew up in the south of the United States. I grew up in Georgia. And Georgia's very green, especially in those days. It's beautiful. We had lots of trees and lots of forests and lots of rain. And the forest to me was always something, I don't know, I couldn't relate to it. There's too much out there. And it's just all kinds of plants, and you can't really walk into it and walk out. You have to have a pathway. And then I went to a camp up in the mountains, and one of the counselors taught us about trees and plants. And one of the things that we had to do, we had to learn the trees. This is a maple tree. This is a poplar. This is a white pine. This is a sweet gum. And then you had to get leaves of the tree. And you had to put them in a special book and press them. And you had to get bark from the tree. And you had to also draw a picture of what those trees looked like by themselves, because a sweet gum has a particular shape. A poplar has another shape. And then we learned about Virginia creeper, and we learned about poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac. That's very important to know. And we learned a lot of things. And then after that, I loved the forest. It was an amazing transformation that now, whenever I would drive in the car, if my father drove me in the car, we're going down from the mountains to go home, I'm looking at all the trees, and those are poplars, those are maples, those are Virginia pines, and this is a particular type of forest. Okay, so now I could see that. See, and so then from that time on, I love to see plants, I love to see trees, I love to see forests, even if I don't know the names of them. So these are really important things, and once you begin to discover about yourself, then you will begin to see through the forest, and you'll be able to tell the forest from the trees, and to tell the trees from the forest. And inshallah, you come to self-knowledge. Self-knowledge is very, very important. May Allah give us that. I hope that question is beneficial, and the answer. Question's definitely beneficial. I hope the answer's okay. Are you being merciful? This is very hard. What are the types of situations and people where we shouldn't speak nicely? What are the boundaries of this type of talking? So, Imam al-Ghazali actually does talk about this. We may not be able to study that particular topic because we don't have a whole lot of time left. But that's very important because generally you want your speech to be very kind, very respectful, very welcoming, loving, if you could use that word. Sometimes you don't want it to be that way. And what would be an example of that? For example, when we're around certain people who are very abusive and who are very manipulative and who harm other people, we might call that person a fasiq, but maybe fasiq is not strong enough. But there are certain people who do wrong. They harm other people, and you know they harm other people. And they maybe abuse other people, and you know they abuse people. So Imam al-Ghazali will say that with these people, you want to be stern. Because of the fact that if you are nice with them, how do they understand that? They understand it as endorsement of themselves. Your friendliness as a justification for greater evil. So there are times to be stern, and the judge in the court doesn't show any favoritism, does he or she? They don't do that. And they have to be that way. Maybe at times we have to be that way as well, especially if we're arbitrating between people. You could think of a lot of examples. Even when we raise our blessed children, our beloved children. Sometimes the children do things that are really impressive to us. But maybe you don't want to be impressed because of the fact that you don't want to hurt that child either. You want that child also to stand on his or her own feet. You don't want them to be dependent on you. They've got to live in the real world. So there are certain times when mothers and fathers don't necessarily show their children how much they actually love them. And it is, we love our children, we're very good to them, but training sometimes requires that we do that. I mentioned this beautiful Mandinka proverb. I love the Mandinkas. They're a noble people in West Africa. They're the descendants of the kings. And all the music that they sing is all wisdom, full of proverbs. They love proverbs. And they will say, make your child a king, and you will be the first to pay the taxes. And they will also say, teach your child adab, so the world can live in peace. Okay, we love children, and they love children. But, there's also certain things that have to be done, so that the child becomes someone who's really beneficial to himself or herself and to the family. And there are a lot of examples. In counseling, even, for example, when a physician is speaking with a sick person, and it may be that the person they're speaking with has also been traumatized. So the physician has to be very careful that he or she doesn't show emotion. That maybe you want to cry when you hear her story, but you can't cry, I'm sorry. And maybe you want to show joy and energy when you talk about how healthy they can be, but maybe you can't do that because they're not strong enough. They can't take that. They can't support that. And even if you show emotions, even like emotions like crying, which would be a natural thing, it could actually harm them because they're not strong. They need to be, and they need you to be strong. They need you to bring them to them. So again, there is a time and place for everything under heaven. The norm is that we speak dignified words, kind words. You know, we want to welcome people, we want to smile, you know, but there are other times when that's not appropriate. Yeah. Yeah, do you have questions? Any, yes, Bilal.
I have a question, Dr. Omar. I have a question about the hadith. ثلاث من كنا فيه كان منافقا.
منافق وإن صام وصلى وزعم أنه مسلم إذا حدث كذب وإذا وعد أخلف وإذا اؤتمن خان. There are three traits which whoever has them is a hypocrite. Allah protect us. Even if he fasts and prays and claims he is a Muslim. If he speaks, he lies. If he makes a promise, he breaks it. If he is given a trust, he betrays it. Now, what is the question, Bilal?
The question about za'ama, as if he's not actually a Muslim by doing these.
Yeah, very good question. So, I hope that I can answer that correctly. I believe the way that, I don't know what the ulama have said about that. I know a little bit about what they have said about similar things. So my belief would be that the ulama would tell us that, you know, he claims that he's a Muslim, but he's not really a Muslim in the eyes of God. Okay, he or she is a Muslim in your eyes and my eyes. And that's very, very important because لا نكفر بذنب. This is one of the basic principles of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We never declare people to be disbelievers because of sins they do or wrongs they do. So even if he lies, even if he promises and breaks his promise, even if he is given a trust and he breaks it, and unfortunately many people do that, then we still don't say you're not a Muslim. We don't have a right to do that. Because in Islam, the requirements that need to be made for us to say that you're a Muslim and I am a Muslim, they are extremely wide. And they have to be kept that way. Otherwise, we begin to destroy ourselves and tear ourselves apart by this horrible phenomenon of takfir. And this is an old thing in Islam. The Khawarij were like that. And they declared the best of believers to be disbelievers. And they were a huge fitna, beyond words. And anyone who does takfir, they are usually called by the ulama Khawarij. No matter if they think they are the best Muslims going, because they have this trait. So we don't want to do that. But it would mean, because the hypocrite is a Muslim in this world, if he or she dies without the gift of transformation and change, he's not a Muslim in the next world. Those who are the lowest in the fire are the hypocrites. And this would be true of Muslim hypocrites, Christian hypocrites, Jewish hypocrites, hypocrites of all faiths, whatever they may be. One of the very dangerous things about the Khawarij, the Takfiris, whoever they may be, is that they usually don't hold on to their faith. And the Prophet also talked about that. He has many hadith about the Khawarij, that if you look at the way they pray all the time. You look at the way they fast every day. They recite the Quran all the time. You would be ashamed of your prayer next to theirs. You would be ashamed of your fast next to theirs. You don't recite Quran as much as they do, but it doesn't go deeper than their collarbones. In other words, it doesn't go deeper than the makharij al-aswat. Because where is the first makhraj? Right here, the collarbone. Ha, ih. Right? This is the first makhraj. So they say that, they're fasih, ihdina. Right there, but it doesn't go deeper. It doesn't go into their hearts. In one hadith, the Prophet said, sharrul khalqi wal khaliqa. They are the worst of all creation and created beings. And he says they leave Islam like an arrow that's shot too hard, that pierces the gate. But they were believers, and so, guess what? You are one. Because when we curse people, and when we declare people to be disbelievers, if that curse is legitimate, then it will stick. There are people who are accursed. No point to mention them, but there are people like that in history. The best of people are keys of good that open up good, and locks of evil that lock down evil. May you be like that. The worst of people are keys of evil that open up evil, like profanity being spread. And they are locks that lock down good. Those are the worst. The others are the best. Okay, so sharrul khalqi wal khaliqa, and many of them end in a bad way. And in fact, we know that. I know a brother, who was here in Cairo, Abdul-Hakim Murad, why not say his name? He's such a brilliant man. T.J. Winter, he's one of the most intelligent people I know, and a very good Muslim. And he was here, and when he was in Cairo studying, he knew a particular man who was extremely rigid and extremely contentious and extremely harsh, and he had a beard as big as a forest. And, then he said he came back to Cairo several years later, and the man had shaved his beard, and he was going out to nightclubs with women. He'd completely changed. Now that doesn't always happen, but that does happen a lot more than you would possibly expect. Because what kind of deen do you have, which is nothing but the exaltation of your ego at the expense of others? That's not good, and it's not safe. So we ask Allah to protect us from that. Have a good opinion of people. There is a story of a great sheikh who was at the end of his life, and he wanted to have a successor, a khalifa. And so he took one of his followers who he believed was very good for that. And he said, you will be my successor. You just have to do one thing. Bring me a person, find a person who you are better than. Okay, well, lots of people in the world, right? And a lot of them are not very nice, right? And so he went and he looked among Muslims and he couldn't find any, and looked among Christians and he couldn't find any because they might become Muslims if nothing else. He looked among other people, and then he just came back and he said, I couldn't find any. Because of the fact that maybe right now he's really bad, but maybe he won't be that way tomorrow. People have the ability to change, especially if you give them a chance. And so he said, I'm sorry, I couldn't find anyone that I am better than. And so he said, then you deserve to be the successor. Shaykh Abdul-Qadir al-Jilani, may Allah be pleased with him, he said, من جعل لنفسه وزنا فلا وزن له ومن جعل لنفسه قدرا فلا قدر له. He said, whoever gives to himself special weight has no weight at all. Whoever gives to himself a special status, special station, has no status at all. May Allah make us humble. May Allah make us humble. Ameen. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضاه واجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما آمين 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 يا رب العالمين. Thank you so much for coming. You make the tent warm. And it's very good to see you. And I'm sorry to say we don't have many more nights, but these nights for me have been really, really special because of you.